Crimson Moons Vow. New York, 1917. Felicia Daniels uncovered a hastily scribbled poem tucked into a veteran's book, ending with "Your legacy lives on," and signed Major Alexander Pierce, stirring echoes of a bygone era. Chapter 1. A Whisper from the Past. The scent of aged paper and leather filled Felicia Daniels' small office at the New York Public Library. Sunlight filtered through the tall, arched windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled over the city since the declaration of war. It was late October 1917, and even here, far from the battlefields of Europe, the war's presence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every newspaper screamed headlines of casualty lists and faraway battles. Every conversation seemed tinged with fear and uncertainty. Felicia, at 58, felt the weight of those years, not in her bones, but in the quiet ache in her heart. Her husband, Thomas, had passed 5 years prior, leaving a void as vast as the library itself. She'd poured herself into her work, cataloging and preserving the written word, finding solace in the stories of others, a refuge from her own quiet grief. Today, she was working on a donation from the estate of a recently deceased veteran, a collection of books he'd purportedly carried with him through the war. Most of the books were standard military fare, manuals, maps, a few tattered novels. But one, a slim volume of poetry by Rupert Brooke, caught her eye. The cover was worn, the spine cracked, and several pages were dog-eared, as if frequently revisited. As she carefully turned the brittle pages, a small slip of paper fluttered out. It was folded in half, the paper thin and yellowed with age. Unfolding it with trembling fingers, Felicia saw it was a poem, handwritten in a hurried, almost frantic script. It wasn't Brooke's work. The style was different, raw and immediate, filled with a desperate longing that resonated deep within her. It spoke of shattered landscapes, the deafening roar of artillery, and the haunting beauty of a fleeting moment shared with a loved one under a shell-torn sky. The words painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture of the trenches, a world Felicia could only imagine. The poem ended abruptly, without a title, but with a final, chilling line, "Your legacy lives on." It was signed simply, Major Alexander Pierce. Felicia reread the poem several times, her heart pounding. The name meant nothing to her, yet the words they felt strangely familiar, like a half-remembered dream. She carefully examined the book again, searching for any other clues. There was a faint inscription on the inside cover, barely legible, "To my dearest A, may these words bring you solace." E, who was A? And who was E?
Was E
Major Alexander Pierce? Or was he the recipient? The mystery, so unexpected, so compelling, stirred something within Felicia, a spark of curiosity that had long lain dormant. She felt a sudden, almost irrational urge to uncover the story behind this poem, to understand the life of this Major Pierce and the A, to whom he or someone else had dedicated this book. She spent the rest of the afternoon poring over military records, cross-referencing names and dates. The library had a surprisingly extensive collection, a testament to the nation's growing involvement in the war. But Alexander Pierce proved elusive. There were dozens of Pierces listed, but none with the rank of major, and none that seemed to fit the scant details she had. Frustration began to set in. It was like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. As the day drew to a close, and the last rays of sunlight faded from the library windows, Felicia felt a pang of disappointment. She carefully placed the poem and the book in a protective archival box, a small, bittersweet ache in her chest. She was about to give up, to chalk it up to another wartime mystery, another untold story lost to the chaos of conflict. But as she locked her office door, a thought struck her. The veteran who had donated the books, his name was listed on the donation form, Elias Thorne. Perhaps he knew something. Perhaps he had known Major Pierce, or at least known of him. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. The address on the donation form led her to a small, unassuming brownstone in Brooklyn. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with similar houses, each a silent witness to the lives lived within. As Felicia approached the Thorne residence, she noticed a woman tending to a small garden in the front yard. She was elderly, her face etched with the lines of time and hardship, but her eyes held a spark of resilience. Felicia hesitated, feeling a sudden wave of nervousness. She was intruding, prying into the life of a stranger, driven by nothing more than a cryptic poem and a desperate need to connect with a past she didn't understand. But the image of the poem, the raw emotion in those handwritten words, spurred her on. Taking a deep breath, she approached the woman. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you Mrs. Thorne?" The woman looked up, her eyes, a pale, watery blue, studying Felicia with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I am," she replied, her voice raspy with age. "Can I help you?" Felicia introduced herself, explaining her connection to the library and the donation of books. She carefully described the volume of poetry and the poem she had found within. As she spoke, she watched Mrs. Thorne's face, searching for any flicker of recognition. Mrs. Thorne listened intently, her gaze fixed on Felicia. When Felicia finished, she remained silent for a long moment, her eyes lost in some distant memory. Then a slow, sad smile touched her lips. "Alexander Pierce," she whispered, the name a breath of air. "My brother spoke of him often. Before he went away." Her voice cracked, and her eyes filled with tears.
He said
Major Pierce saved his life. In the trenches. Felicia's heart leaped. This was it. A connection. A thread to follow. But the sadness in Mrs. Thorne's eyes, the unspoken grief in her voice, hinted at a story far more complex, far more tragic, than Felicia could have ever imagined. The whisper from the past was about to become a roar. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Flanders Fields. Mrs. Thorne, whose first name, Felicia learned, was Clara, invited her inside. The house was small, filled with the scent of lavender and old wood. Photographs lined the walls, mostly of young men in uniform, their smiles frozen in time, a stark reminder of the countless lives touched by the war. Clara led Felicia to a small parlor, where they sat facing each other, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the room. "My brother, Elijah, was just a boy when he enlisted," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. 18, barely old enough to shave. "He was so eager to go, to do his duty. He believed in the cause, you see. Believed he was fighting for freedom, for democracy." She paused, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "He didn't know, he couldn't have known what awaited him." Clara retrieved a small, worn wooden box from a shelf. Inside, nestled amongst faded ribbons and dried flowers, were letters. Dozens of them, tied together with string. Elijah's letters home. "He wrote to me every week," Clara said, her fingers tracing the faded ink. At first, the letters were full of bravado, of tales of adventure and camaraderie. He spoke of the mud, the rats, the endless waiting, but he always ended with a cheerful note, assuring me he was well, that he was safe. She carefully untied one of the bundles and handed a letter to Felicia. The handwriting was neat, almost childlike, but the words spoke of a world far removed from the innocence of youth. Elijah described the relentless shelling, the constant fear, the sheer exhaustion of life in the trenches. He mentioned a few names, comrades in arms, but it was Major Alexander Pierce who featured most prominently. Major Pierce was his commanding officer, Clara explained. Elijah idolized him. He said he was a true leader, a man of courage and compassion. He looked after his men, treated them with respect, even in the midst of hell. As Felicia read through the letters, a picture of Major Pierce began to emerge. He was a man of contrasts, a stern disciplinarian, yet possessed of a deep empathy for his men. He was a brilliant strategist, but also a poet at heart, a man who found solace in words even as he faced the horrors of war. Elijah described how Major Pierce would often read poetry to his men, his voice a calming presence in the midst of the chaos. He'd share stories of his life before the war, of a woman he loved, a woman he'd left behind. He never mentioned her name, Clara said, her eyes clouding over. Just, He always referred to her as, the same initial from the inscription in the book. Felicia felt a shiver run down her spine. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they were forming was far from complete. Later letters became darker, more despairing. The initial enthusiasm had faded, replaced by a bone-weary exhaustion and a growing sense of disillusionment. Elijah wrote of the senseless slaughter, the futility of it all. He described the horrific conditions, the disease, the constant threat of death. He spoke of losing friends, of watching men die in his arms. And then the letter stopped. Clara closed the box, her hands trembling. The last letter I received was dated July 1916. He was fighting in the Somme. The Battle of the Somme, she couldn't finish the sentence. The name itself was synonymous with unimaginable loss, a battle that had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Felicia gently touched Clara's hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. The War Department sent a telegram. "Missing in action. Presumed dead." She choked back a sob. "They never found his body. He's just gone. Lost in the mud of Flanders fields." The weight of Clara's grief was almost unbearable. Felicia felt a profound sadness, not just for Elijah, but for all the young men lost to the war, for all the families shattered by loss. "Did Elijah ever mention a poem?" Felicia asked, hesitantly. "A poem written by Major Pierce?" Clara looked up, her eyes searching Felicia's face. "He did," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He said Major Pierce wrote a poem for four, a love poem. He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. He memorized it. Said he would recite it to me when he came home." Clara closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He never got the chance." Felicia felt a lump in her throat. The poem she had found, it was that poem. The poem Elijah had memorized, the poem that had somehow found its way into a book donated to the library years later. A poem that was a testament to a love lost, a life cut short, a legacy buried in the mud of a faraway battlefield. But the final line, "Your legacy lives on," still haunted her. What did it mean? Was it simply a poetic flourish, a desperate attempt to find meaning in the face of death? Or was there something more, something hidden, something waiting to be discovered? As Felicia left Clara's house, the shadows of the evening deepening around her, she knew she couldn't let it go. She had to find out the truth. She had to uncover the story of Major Alexander Pierce and his beloved A. She had to understand the legacy that, against all odds, had somehow survived the war. The shadow of Flanders fields had stretched across the ocean, across the years, and had touched her life in a way she could never have foreseen. And she knew, with a growing certainty, that her journey had just begun. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Library. Back in the familiar sanctuary of the library, Felicia felt a renewed sense of purpose. Clara Thorne's grief, Elijah's letters, the haunting words of Major Pierce's poem, they had all woven themselves into a tapestry of mystery that she felt compelled to unravel. The library, with its hushed whispers and towering shelves, felt like the perfect place to continue her search. It was a repository of knowledge, a place where the past lived on in the written word. She started by revisiting the military records, this time with a more focused approach. She knew now that Major Pierce had served in the Somme, a crucial piece of information that narrowed her search considerably. She meticulously scanned casualty lists, officer rosters, and regimental histories, her eyes burning from the strain. Hours passed, and the only sounds were the rustling of pages and the distant rumble of the city outside. She found several Alexander Pierces, but none matched the profile that was emerging from Elijah's letters and the poem. One was too young, another too old. One had died in 1915, before the Somme. Another was listed as having served in a different regiment, one that hadn't been involved in that particular battle. Just as she was about to give up, she stumbled upon a record that made her heart skip a beat. It was a brief mention in a regimental history, a footnote referencing a Major Alexander Pierce who had been awarded a medal for bravery during the Battle of the Somme. The entry mentioned that he had been attached to the same regiment as Elijah Thorne. It was a small detail, but it was enough. Felicia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This had to be him. The Alexander Pierce. But the footnote also mentioned something else, something that sent a chill down her spine. Major Alexander Pierce had been reported missing in action, presumed dead, on the same day as Elijah Thorne. She stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. Both men, lost on the same day, in the same battle. It seemed too much of a coincidence. Had they died together? Had Major Pierce, in his final moments, thought of the woman he loved, the woman to whom he had dedicated his poem? Felicia felt a surge of empathy for this unknown woman, a woman who, like Clara, had likely waited in vain for a loved one who would never return. She imagined receiving the dreaded telegram, the crushing weight of loss, the endless years of wondering, of hoping against hope. Driven by a need to know more, Felicia delved deeper into the library's archives. She discovered that the regimental history had a companion volume, a collection of letters and diaries written by soldiers who had served in the Somme. It was a long shot, but she hoped it might contain some further mention of Major Pierce, perhaps even a clue to the identity of A. The book was heavy, its pages filled with the handwritten accounts of young men caught in the maelstrom of war. The stories were raw, visceral, filled with the horrors of trench warfare. But amidst the accounts of death and destruction, Felicia found glimpses of humanity, of courage, of love. She found several references to Major Pierce, confirming his reputation as a brave and compassionate leader. One soldier described him as a rock in the storm, a man who inspired confidence and loyalty in his men. Another wrote of how Major Pierce would often share stories of his home, of his family, of the woman he loved. Again, the woman was referred to only as A. And then Felicia found it. A short entry in the diary of a young lieutenant, dated just days before the fateful battle. The lieutenant wrote of overhearing Major Pierce reciting a poem to a group of soldiers. He described the poem as a love poem, a testament to a love that transcends even death. He didn't write down the poem itself, but he mentioned that Major Pierce had said it was written for the woman who holds my heart, my beloved A. Felicia closed the book, her hands trembling. She had found confirmation of the poem's existence, of its purpose, of its intended recipient. But the identity of A remained a mystery. As she sat there, surrounded by the silent witnesses of history, Felicia felt a growing sense of frustration. She had come so far, yet she was still so far from the truth. She had a name, a rank, a poem, a battle, a date. But she didn't have the key, the missing piece that would unlock the whole story. She decided to take a break, to clear her head. She walked through the library's grand reading room, the high ceilings and ornate decorations a stark contrast to the grim realities she had been immersed in. She paused by a window, looking out at the city below. The streets were bustling with activity, life going on as usual, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the library's walls. As she gazed out at the city, a thought struck her. Major Pierce had mentioned his home, his family. He must have had an address, a place where he lived before the war. Perhaps his family still lived there. Perhaps they knew the identity of A. It was another long shot, but it was all she had. She returned to her office, determined to find Major Pierce's address. She searched through city directories, census records, anything that might contain a clue. It was a tedious, painstaking process, but she refused to give up. Finally, after hours of searching, she found it. A listing in a 1915 city directory. Pierce, Alexander, Major, 12, Willow Creek Lane, Greenwich Village. Felicia stared at the address, her heart pounding. Greenwich Village. It was a vibrant, artistic neighborhood, known for its bohemian atmosphere. It was a place where poets and writers gathered, a place where love and creativity flourished. It seemed fitting that Major Pierce, a poet at heart, would have lived there. She knew what she had to do. She had to go to Greenwich Village. She had to see if 12, Willow Creek Lane still existed. She had to see if anyone there remembered Major Alexander Pierce. She had to find A. The echoes in the library had led her this far. Now it was time to step outside, into the real world, and follow the trail wherever it might lead. The city, with its secrets and its stories, awaited her. Chapter 4. The Major's Lost Letters. Willow Creek Lane was a narrow, cobblestone street, tucked away in the heart of Greenwich Village. The brownstones were old, their facades adorned with intricate carvings and wrought iron balconies. It was a quiet, almost secluded enclave, a world away from the bustling city streets Felicia had left behind. The air smelled of jasmine and freshly baked bread, a comforting aroma that eased the tension in her shoulders. Number 12 was a 3-story brownstone, its windows framed by ivy. A small, brass plaque on the door simply read Pierce. Felicia hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the home of Major Alexander Pierce. The place where he had lived, loved, and dreamed before the war had stolen him away. Taking a deep breath, she rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house, followed by a long silence. Felicia was about to ring again when the door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, her face framed by a halo of silver hair. She was tall and slender, her posture erect, her eyes a piercing blue that seemed to see right through Felicia. She was dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, a sign of mourning that was all too common in these wartime years. "Yes?" the woman asked, her voice refined, with a hint of a British accent. Felicia introduced herself, explaining her connection to the library and her research into Major Alexander Pierce. She carefully mentioned the poem, the letters, Elijah Thorne, and Clara. The woman listened intently, her expression unchanging. When Felicia finished, she remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond Felicia's shoulder. "Alexander," she whispered, the name a breath of air. "My son." Felicia's heart leaped. This was Major Pierce's mother. She had found her. "I am Eleanor Pierce," the woman said, finally meeting Felicia's gaze. "Please come in." Eleanor led Felicia into a spacious parlor, filled with antique furniture and family portraits. The room felt both grand and intimate, a reflection of a life lived with both privilege and grace. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a familiar sight that brought Felicia a sense of comfort. "I apologize for my appearance," Eleanor said, gesturing to her black dress. "I am still in mourning. It has been difficult." Felicia nodded, understandingly. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said. Eleanor smiled sadly. "Thank you. It is kind of you to come. It is unusual to have someone inquire about Alexander after all these years." Felicia explained her discovery of the poem, her conversation with Clara Thorne, and her growing fascination with Major Pierce's story. She expressed her desire to understand the legacy he had left behind, to uncover the identity of the woman he had loved, the mysterious A. Eleanor listened patiently, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and curiosity. When Felicia finished, she rose and walked to a large, mahogany desk that stood by the window. She opened a drawer and retrieved a small, leather-bound box. "These are Alexander's letters," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Letters he wrote to me from the front. I have not been able to bring myself to read them since he was reported missing." She handed the box to Felicia. The leather was worn, the edges frayed, but the box itself felt surprisingly heavy, as if it contained the weight of a life, a love, a loss. Felicia opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled amongst dried flowers and faded ribbons, were dozens of letters, tied together with string. They were similar to Elijah Thorne's letters, but these were written in a different hand, a more elegant, flowing script. "I believe you will find what you are looking for in these letters," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander was a prolific writer. He poured his heart and soul into his letters. He wrote about everything. His experiences, his fears, his hopes, his love. Felicia thanked Eleanor, promising to handle the letters with the utmost care. She felt a profound sense of responsibility, holding these private missives, these glimpses into a life cut short by war. As she began to read the letters, she was immediately drawn into Major Pierce's world. He wrote with a clarity and passion that belied the horrific conditions he was facing. He described the beauty of the French countryside, the camaraderie of his men, the constant fear of death. He wrote of his longing for home, for his mother, for the woman he loved. And, as Eleanor had predicted, he wrote extensively about A. He never mentioned her full name, but his descriptions of her were vivid, passionate, filled with a love that transcended the miles and the horrors of war. He wrote of her intelligence, her beauty, her spirit, her unwavering support. He wrote of their shared dreams, their hopes for the future, a future that was now tragically out of reach. In one letter, he described a stolen moment they had shared before he left for the front. They had met in secret, under the cover of darkness, in a small garden hidden away from prying eyes. He wrote of the scent of her hair, the touch of her hand, the whispered promises they had made to each other. He wrote of how he had given her a small, silver locket, a token of his love, a promise of his return. As Felicia read these words, she felt a pang of sadness, a deep empathy for these two lovers, separated by war, their future stolen from them. But she also felt a growing sense of hope. The letters were revealing the story of Major Alexander Pierce and his beloved A story that deserved to be told, a story that, against all odds, had survived. The final letter in the box was dated just days before the Battle of the Somme. It was a short, hurried note, written in a shaky hand. Major Pierce wrote of the impending battle, of his fear, but also of his determination to do his duty. He ended the letter with a message for A. "My dearest A," he wrote, "if you are reading this, it means I have not returned. Know that I loved you with all my heart, with every fiber of my being. Know that my last thoughts were of you. And know that, wherever I am, I will always be with you. Your legacy lives on." Felicia closed the box, her eyes filled with tears. The same words, the same ending. The poem and the letter, they were connected. They were both expressions of the same love, the same loss, the same enduring legacy. But the question remained, who was A? The letters had brought Felicia closer to the truth, but the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. And as she looked at Eleanor Pierce, sitting quietly in her chair, her face etched with grief, she knew that the answer lay somewhere within this house, within the memories of this woman who had lost her son to the ravages of war. A crucial detail, a hidden clue was close. She could feel it. The Major's lost letters had revealed so much, yet the most important secret remained veiled. Chapter 5. A Glimmer of Recognition. Felicia spent the next few days immersed in Major Alexander Pierce's letters. She carefully transcribed them, making notes, cross-referencing details with historical records and Elijah Thorne's letters. She felt like a detective, piecing together fragments of a shattered past, trying to reconstruct a love story that had been tragically cut short. Eleanor Pierce, though initially reserved, gradually opened up to Felicia. She shared stories of Alexander's childhood, his passion for literature, his dreams of becoming a writer. She spoke of his kindness, his generosity, his unwavering sense of justice. She painted a picture of a young man full of life, full of promise, a man who had been deeply loved and deeply missed. But when Felicia gently broached the subject of A, Eleanor became hesitant. She admitted that Alexander had been deeply in love, that he had spoken of a woman who had captured his heart. But she claimed not to know her full name. He was very protective of her, Eleanor explained.
He said it was complicated.
That her family wouldn't approve. This revelation piqued Felicia's curiosity. Why wouldn't A's family approve of Alexander? Was it a matter of social class, religion, or something else entirely? Felicia continued to pore over the letters, searching for any clue that might shed light on this mystery. She found several references to A's artistic talents, her love of music, her passion for social justice. She learned that A had been involved in the suffragette movement, fighting for women's right to vote. She discovered that A had volunteered at a local hospital, tending to wounded soldiers. These details painted a picture of a strong, independent woman, a woman who was ahead of her time. A woman who was not afraid to challenge convention, to fight for what she believed in. A woman who was a perfect match for Alexander Pierce. One evening, as Felicia was working late in her office at the library, she stumbled upon a passage in one of Alexander's letters that made her heart skip a beat. He wrote of a clandestine meeting with A at a rally for women's suffrage. He described the scene vividly, the crowds of people, the passionate speeches, the banners waving in the air. He mentioned that A had been wearing a particular dress, a blue silk gown with a white lace collar. He wrote that she had looked radiant, like an angel fighting for a just cause. Felicia reread the passage several times, her mind racing. The description of the dress, it felt familiar. She had seen it somewhere before.
But where?
She searched through her notes, her eyes scanning the pages. And then she remembered. Clara Thorne had shown her photographs of her brother, Elijah. There was one photograph in particular, a group shot of Elijah and his fellow soldiers, taken before they had left for the front. In the background, standing slightly apart from the group, was a young woman. She was wearing a blue silk dress with a white lace collar. Felicia quickly retrieved the photograph from her files. She stared at the image, her heart pounding. The woman in the photograph, it was just a grainy, black and white image, but there was something about her, a spark in her eyes, a certain tilt of her head that resonated with Alexander's descriptions of A. Could it be? Could this woman in the photograph be A? Felicia felt a surge of excitement. It was a long shot, but it was the most promising lead she had had so far. She decided to show the photograph to Eleanor Pierce. The next morning, Felicia returned to Willow Creek Lane. She found Eleanor in the parlor, arranging flowers in a vase. The room was filled with the scent of roses, a delicate fragrance that contrasted with the heavy weight of the past that hung in the air. Felicia carefully explained her discovery, showing Eleanor the photograph and pointing out the woman in the blue dress. She watched Eleanor's face closely, searching for any sign of recognition. Eleanor stared at the photograph for a long moment, her eyes widening slightly. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the outline of the woman's face. This is," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "This is Amelia." Felicia's heart leaped. Amelia. The name. Finally. Amelia Harper. Eleanor continued, her voice barely audible. She was Alexander's fiancée. Felicia was stunned. Fiancée. They had been engaged. This wasn't just a fleeting romance, a wartime fling. This was a deep, committed love, a love that had been meant to last a lifetime. But you said you didn't know her full name, Felicia stammered, confused. Eleanor looked away, her eyes filled with shame. I lied, she confessed. I knew all along. But I couldn't bring myself to speak of her. It was too painful. She explained that Amelia's family, the Harpers, were wealthy and influential. They had disapproved of Alexander, considering him to be beneath their social standing. They had forbidden Amelia from seeing him, threatening to disown her if she disobeyed. They were cruel, Eleanor said, her voice filled with bitterness. They didn't understand, they didn't see how much Alexander and Amelia loved each other. They didn't care. Alexander and Amelia had continued to see each other in secret, defying her family's wishes. They had planned to elope, to run away together and start a new life. But then, the war had intervened. Alexander had felt it was his duty to enlist, to fight for his country. He had promised Amelia that he would return, that they would be together no matter what. He wrote to her constantly, Eleanor said, her eyes filling with tears. He sent her poems, drawings, little gifts, anything to remind her of his love. He even sent her a lock of his hair, wrapped in a piece of silk. Felicia remembered the locket, the silver locket that Alexander had given to A before he left.
It all made sense now.
The forbidden love, the secret meetings, the desperate promises. What happened to Amelia? Felicia asked softly. After Alexander? Eleanor's face crumpled. She never recovered, she whispered. She received the telegram, the news of his death. It broke her. She retreated into herself. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped living. Eleanor paused, taking a deep breath to compose herself. A few months later, she took her own life. She couldn't bear to live without him. Felicia was overwhelmed with emotion. The story of Alexander and Amelia, it was a tragedy of epic proportions. A love story destroyed by war, by prejudice, by the cruel hand of fate. A glimmer of recognition had led to a devastating truth. The legacy that lived on was not one of hope, but of profound loss.
Or so it seemed.
But the photograph, Elijah was in it too, standing near Amelia. There was a connection there, a link that Felicia still didn't fully understand. She felt there was something more, some crucial detail she was missing. Chapter 6. The Wartime Nurse's Secret. The revelation of Amelia's tragic fate left Felicia reeling. The weight of Alexander and Amelia's love story, so full of promise and so brutally cut short, settled heavily upon her. Yet, amidst the sadness, a persistent question nagged at her. What was Amelia's connection to Elijah Thorne? The photograph showed them together, a seemingly casual proximity, yet Felicia sensed a deeper significance. She decided to return to Clara Thorne, hoping to glean more information about Amelia. She brought the photograph, along with copies of Alexander's letters and a transcription of his poem. She felt a responsibility to share what she had learned, to give Clara some closure, however painful it might be. Clara greeted Felicia with a mixture of sadness and anticipation. The news of Alexander's confirmed death and the revelation of his engagement to Amelia was a blow, but it also provided a sense of finality. Clara had lived with uncertainty for so long, the hope that Elijah might somehow still be alive, that the telegram had been a mistake. Now she knew the truth. Felicia showed Clara the photograph, pointing out Amelia. Clara studied the image intently, her eyes widening in recognition. "I remember her," she said, her voice trembling. "Elijah, he introduced us. He said she was a friend. A very dear friend." Clara retrieved a small, worn wooden box from a shelf, the same box that contained Elijah's letters. This time, she pulled out a different bundle, tied with a faded pink ribbon. "These are letters from Amelia," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Elijah, he asked me to keep them safe. He said they were important." Felicia's heart skipped a beat. Letters from Amelia. This was unexpected. This could be the key, the missing piece that would unlock the final secrets of this wartime tragedy. Clara carefully untied the ribbon and handed a letter to Felicia. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, similar to Alexander's, but with a distinctly feminine touch. The letter was dated shortly after Elijah had left for the front. As Felicia read the letter, she was immediately drawn into Amelia's world. She wrote with a warmth and intimacy that revealed a deep affection for Elijah. She spoke of her loneliness, her fears for Alexander, her longing for the war to end. She described her volunteer work at the hospital, tending to wounded soldiers. "I see so much suffering," Amelia wrote. "So much pain. It breaks my heart to see these young men, so broken, so lost. I try to comfort them, to ease their pain, but it is never enough. I feel so helpless." She mentioned Alexander frequently, expressing her unwavering love for him, her belief in his courage, her desperate hope for his safe return. She also spoke of Elijah, thanking him for his friendship, for his support, for his understanding. "You are a true friend, Elijah," she wrote. "You understand my pain, my fears, my hopes. You listen without judgment. You offer comfort without pity. You are a lifeline in this sea of despair." As Felicia read through the letters, a picture of Amelia's relationship with Elijah began to emerge. It was a deep, platonic friendship, forged in the crucible of war. They had shared their sorrows, their fears, their hopes. They had found solace in each other's company, a refuge from the harsh realities of the world around them. But there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface of the words. Felicia sensed a subtle shift in Amelia's tone in the later letters. Her expressions of gratitude to Elijah became more effusive, her descriptions of their time together more intimate. She started to refer to him as my dearest friend, my confidant, my rock. And then Felicia found it. A letter dated just weeks before Alexander's death. In this letter, Amelia confessed a secret to Elijah, a secret that she had kept hidden from everyone else, even Alexander. My dearest Elijah, she wrote, I must tell you something that has been weighing heavily on my heart. I am with child. Alexander's child. Felicia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alexander's child. The legacy. It wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was real. Amelia had been pregnant when Alexander died. The final line of the poem, Your legacy lives on, took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just about Amelia's memory of Alexander. It was about their child, their unborn child, a child who represented their love, their hope, their future. Felicia continued to read, her heart pounding. Amelia wrote of her fear, her uncertainty, her determination to protect her child. She had told no one else, fearing the judgment of society, the wrath of her family. She had confided in Elijah, trusting him implicitly, knowing that he would understand. Elijah had known. He had known about Amelia's pregnancy. He had known about Alexander's child. And he had kept the secret, even in death. Felicia looked at Clara, her eyes filled with tears. Clara, she said, her voice trembling. Amelia, she was pregnant. With Alexander's child. Clara stared at Felicia, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. Pregnant? She whispered. But what happened? What happened to the child? Felicia shook her head, her mind reeling. She didn't know. The letter stopped abruptly, just like Elijah's. There was no mention of the child's fate. The wartime nurse's secret had been revealed, but a new mystery had emerged. What had happened to Alexander and Amelia's child? Had the child been born? Had it survived? And if so, where was it now? The legacy, it seemed, was not yet fully unveiled. A new, urgent question demanded an answer. Chapter 7. Beneath a Sky of Gunfire. The revelation of Amelia's pregnancy sent Felicia on a frantic search for answers. She returned to the library, poring over birth records, hospital records, orphanage records, anything that might contain a clue to the fate of Alexander and Amelia's child. Days turned into weeks, and the library became her second home. She barely slept, fueled by a relentless determination to uncover the truth. She discovered that Amelia had indeed given birth, a baby girl, born in a small, private clinic in Greenwich Village, just a few months after Alexander's death. The birth certificate listed the mother as Amelia Harper, but the father's name was left blank. The child's name was listed as Eleanor, after Alexander's mother. Felicia felt a surge of emotion. The child had been born. Alexander's legacy had lived on, at least for a time. But the birth certificate provided no further information. There was no address, no indication of what had happened to Amelia or her baby after the birth. Felicia returned to Eleanor Pierce, hoping she might have some knowledge of her granddaughter's existence. She showed Eleanor the birth certificate, explaining what she had learned. Eleanor stared at the document, her eyes filling with tears. She had known about Amelia's pregnancy, but she had believed the child had been stillborn. Amelia's family, the Harpers, had told her that the baby had died shortly after birth. They had forbidden Eleanor from seeing Amelia, from attending the funeral, from having any contact with her whatsoever. They were so cruel, Eleanor whispered, her voice choked with emotion. They wanted to erase Alexander's memory and Amelia's completely. They even tried to destroy his letters, his belongings, everything that reminded them of him. Eleanor had believed them. She had grieved for both her son and her unborn grandchild, accepting the Harpers' version of events as the truth. She had never known that her granddaughter had been born alive. Felicia realized that the Harpers had lied. They had deliberately kept Eleanor in the dark, preventing her from knowing about her granddaughter's existence. They had likely taken the child, hidden her away, perhaps even given her up for adoption. Determined to uncover the truth, Felicia decided to investigate the Harpers. She learned that they were a prominent New York family, involved in banking and politics. They were wealthy, influential, and fiercely protective of their reputation. She discovered that Amelia's father, Charles Harper, had been a particularly ruthless man, obsessed with maintaining his family's social standing. He had disapproved of Alexander from the start, considering him to be a social climber, unworthy of his daughter. He had done everything in his power to separate them, even resorting to threats and intimidation. Felicia suspected that Charles Harper had been the driving force behind the cover-up. He had likely orchestrated the lie about the child's death, ensuring that Amelia and Alexander's legacy would be erased forever.
But why?
What was his motive? Was it simply a matter of social prejudice? Or was there something more? Felicia delved deeper into the Harper's family history, searching for any clue that might explain Charles Harper's actions. She discovered that the family had been plagued by scandal in the past, rumors of financial impropriety, infidelity, and even a suspected murder. Charles Harper had been determined to protect his family's name, to suppress any hint of scandal, no matter the cost. Felicia realized that Amelia's pregnancy had been a threat to Charles Harper's carefully constructed facade. An illegitimate child, born out of wedlock, to a man he despised, it was a scandal he could not tolerate. He had to eliminate the evidence, to erase the child from existence. But where was the child now? Felicia felt a growing sense of urgency. She had to find Eleanor, Alexander, and Amelia's daughter. She had to bring her home, to reunite her with her grandmother, to restore her rightful legacy. She decided to focus her search on orphanages and adoption agencies in the New York area. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. She spent countless hours poring over records, her eyes burning from the strain. The task was daunting, the sheer volume of information overwhelming. And then, she found it. A record in an adoption agency's files, a brief entry mentioning a baby girl named Eleanor, who had been placed for adoption in 1917. The mother's name was listed as H, the father's name was unknown. The date of birth matched the date on the birth certificate. Felicia's heart pounded. This had to be her, Alexander and Amelia's daughter. But the record also mentioned something else, something that sent a shiver down her spine. The child had been adopted by a family in England. England. Across the ocean. A world away. Felicia felt a mixture of hope and despair. She had found Eleanor, but she was so far away. How could she possibly track her down? How could she bring her home? She remembered something Eleanor Pierce had said, a seemingly insignificant detail. Eleanor had mentioned that Alexander had a cousin, a distant relative, who lived in London. Perhaps this cousin knew something. Perhaps he had been in contact with the adoptive family. It was a slim chance, but it was all she had. Felicia decided to write to Alexander's cousin, hoping against hope that he might be able to help. She composed a letter, carefully explaining her research, her discovery of Eleanor's existence, her desperate desire to reunite her with her grandmother. She sent the letter, along with copies of the birth certificate and the adoption record, by airmail, knowing that it would take weeks, perhaps even months, to reach its destination. As she waited for a reply, Felicia felt a profound sense of uncertainty. She had come so far, uncovered so many secrets, yet the final chapter of this wartime love story remained unwritten. The fate of Alexander and Amelia's daughter, the legacy that had lived on beneath a sky of gunfire, hung in the balance. And Felicia could only pray that, somehow, she would be able to bring this story to a close, to find the peace and justice that these two lovers and their child deserved. The echoes from across the ocean were faint, but she strained to hear them, clinging to the hope that they would lead her to the truth. Chapter 8. The Rendezvous at Dawn. Weeks turned into months, and Felicia waited anxiously for a reply from Alexander Pierce's cousin in London. The silence was deafening, and she began to fear that her letter had been lost, or that the cousin was unwilling or unable to help. The war continued to rage in Europe, and the news from the front was grim. Casualty lists grew longer, and the hope for a swift end to the conflict dwindled. Felicia continued her work at the library, but her heart was no longer in it. Her thoughts were consumed by Alexander and Amelia's story, by the fate of their daughter, Eleanor. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, a desperate need to bring this story to a close. One cold, gray morning in early December, a letter arrived. It was postmarked London, and the handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. Felicia's heart leaped with anticipation. She tore open the letter, her hands trembling. The letter was from a man named Arthur Chesterton, Alexander Pierce's cousin. He wrote that he had been deeply moved by Felicia's letter, that he remembered Alexander fondly, and that he was shocked and saddened to learn of Amelia's fate and the existence of their child. Arthur explained that he had lost touch with Alexander during the war, but that he had heard rumors of a secret love affair, a forbidden romance. He had never known the details, but he had always suspected that Alexander had been deeply in love with someone he couldn't marry. He wrote that he had no knowledge of the child's adoption, but that he was willing to help Felicia in any way he could. He offered to make inquiries, to contact friends and acquaintances who might have some information. He also mentioned that he had a small collection of Alexander's belongings, items that had been sent to him after Alexander's death. He invited Felicia to visit him in London, to examine these belongings, in case they might contain any clues. Felicia was overjoyed. This was a breakthrough. Arthur Chesterton's offer of help was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She immediately wrote back, thanking him profusely and accepting his invitation. She knew that traveling to England during wartime would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous. But she was determined to go. She had to meet Arthur Chesterton, to see Alexander's belongings, to continue her search for Eleanor. She applied for a passport, a process that was fraught with bureaucratic delays and complications. She needed special permission to travel to a war zone, and she had to provide a compelling reason for her journey. She explained her research, her connection to Alexander Pierce, her desire to reunite his daughter with her grandmother. After weeks of waiting, her passport was finally approved. She booked passage on a merchant ship, one of the few vessels still crossing the Atlantic. The journey would be long and perilous, the threat of German U-boats ever present. Felicia informed Eleanor Pierce of her plans. Eleanor was both grateful and apprehensive. She was desperate to learn the fate of her granddaughter, but she was also terrified for Felicia's safety. "Please be careful," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "This war, it has taken so much from us already. I couldn't bear to lose you too." Felicia promised to be careful, to take every precaution. She packed her bags, including copies of all the documents she had collected, photographs of Alexander and Amelia, and the transcription of Alexander's poem. As she prepared to leave, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was embarking on a journey into the unknown, a journey that could lead her to the truth, or to disappointment. But she was driven by a sense of purpose, a belief that she was doing the right thing, that she was honoring the memory of Alexander and Amelia, that she was fulfilling their legacy. The ship departed from New York Harbor on a cold, misty morning. As Felicia stood on the deck, watching the city skyline fade into the distance, she felt a pang of loneliness, a sense of isolation. She was leaving behind everything she knew, everything that was familiar, to venture into a world torn apart by war. The journey was long and arduous. The ship was crowded, the conditions cramped, the food scarce. The passengers were a mixture of nationalities, backgrounds, and motivations. Some were returning home, some were fleeing the war, some, like Felicia, were on a mission of their own. The threat of U-boats was constant. The ship traveled in convoy, escorted by destroyers, but the danger was always present. There were several close calls, moments of terror when the alarm sounded and the passengers were ordered to don life jackets. Felicia spent most of her time reading, writing, and reflecting. She reread Alexander's letters, Amelia's letters, Elijah Thorne's letters, trying to glean any new insights, any hidden clues. She studied maps of London, familiarizing herself with the city, planning her search. After nearly 2 weeks at sea, the ship finally arrived in Liverpool. Felicia disembarked, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She traveled by train to London, arriving in the city late at night. London was a city transformed by war. The streets were dark, the buildings shrouded in blackout curtains. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and the sound of air raid sirens. The people were weary, their faces etched with worry and fatigue. Felicia checked into a small hotel near Arthur Chesterton's address. She was exhausted, but she couldn't sleep. She was too excited, too anxious to meet Arthur, to see Alexander's belongings. She arranged to meet Arthur the following morning, at dawn, in a small park near his home. Arthur had suggested the early hour, explaining that he preferred to avoid drawing attention to their meeting. He was concerned about the authorities, about the possibility of being questioned about his connection to a deceased enemy soldier. Felicia arrived at the park just as the sun was beginning to rise. The sky was a pale gray, the air crisp and cold. The park was deserted, except for a few early morning walkers and a lone figure sitting on a bench, silhouetted against the rising sun. As Felicia approached, the figure stood up. It was Arthur Chesterton. He was a tall, thin man, with graying hair and a kind face. He greeted Felicia with a warm smile, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The rendezvous at dawn, in this quiet, war-torn city, felt like a scene from a spy novel. Felicia felt a shiver of excitement, a sense of being caught up in a story much larger than herself. But she also felt a profound sense of purpose, a determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The meeting with Arthur was a crucial step, a turning point in her quest. She had a feeling that the answers she sought were close, within her grasp. Chapter 9. Whispers Across the Atlantic. Arthur Chesterton led Felicia to a small, but comfortable, flat in a quiet residential street. The apartment was filled with books, paintings, and antique furniture, a reflection of Arthur's scholarly interests and his connection to the past. The air smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, a familiar and comforting aroma that reminded Felicia of her own office at the library. "I apologize for the early hour," Arthur said, offering Felicia a cup of tea. "But I thought it best to be discreet. London is a different place these days. Everyone is suspicious. Everyone is on edge." Felicia nodded, understandingly. "I appreciate your caution," she said, "and I'm grateful for your willingness to help." Arthur smiled. "Alexander was my cousin," he said. "I owed it to his memory to at least hear your story. And I confess I am intrigued. This secret love affair. It is quite a tale." Felicia shared the details of her research, showing Arthur the letters, the photographs, the birth certificate, and the adoption record. Arthur listened intently, his eyes widening with surprise and sadness as he learned of Alexander and Amelia's tragic fate and the existence of their child. "I had no idea," he said, shaking his head. "Alexander, he never spoke of her. He was always so reserved, so private. But I knew there was someone. He was different when he returned from his last leave. He seemed distracted, preoccupied. I thought it was just the war, the stress of command. But now I understand." Arthur retrieved a small, wooden box from a shelf. "These are Alexander's belongings," he said. "Items that were sent to me after his death. I haven't been able to bring myself to look at them for years." Felicia felt a surge of anticipation. This box, it could contain the key, the final piece of the puzzle. Arthur opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled amongst faded ribbons and dried flowers, were a few personal items: a pocket watch, a silver cigarette case, a leather-bound journal, and a small, velvet pouch. Felicia's heart skipped a beat when she saw the pouch. It looked familiar. She remembered Alexander's letter, the one where he described giving Amelia a silver locket, a token of his love. Could this be it? Arthur gently opened the pouch. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton wool, was a silver locket. It was heart-shaped, intricately engraved with a floral design. Arthur handed the locket to Felicia. Felicia's hands trembled as she took the locket. She carefully opened it. Inside, on one side, was a miniature portrait of Alexander, his eyes smiling, his face full of life. On the other side was a lock of hair, a dark, curly strand, wrapped in a piece of faded blue silk. Felicia gasped. This was it. The locket Alexander had given to Amelia. The lock of his hair. The silk, it was the same color as the dress Amelia had worn in the photograph. Tears welled up in Felicia's eyes. This locket, it was a tangible link to Alexander and Amelia, a symbol of their love, a testament to their enduring bond. "There's something else," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. He reached into the box again and retrieved a small, folded piece of paper. It was a letter, addressed to Alexander, in a handwriting that Felicia recognized immediately. It was Amelia's. The letter was short, undated, and unsigned. It was clearly written in haste, perhaps in secret. "My dearest Alexander," Amelia wrote, "I have received your letter. I understand your fears, your doubts. But I believe in you. I believe in our love. I will wait for you, no matter how long it takes. And I have a secret to share, a secret that will bind us together forever. I am carrying your child, our child, a legacy of our love. Meet me at the usual place as soon as you can. All my love, A." Felicia felt a chill run down her spine. This letter, it confirmed everything. Amelia's pregnancy, her love for Alexander, her determination to share her secret with him. The usual place, it must have been the garden, the secret meeting place Alexander had described in his letters. But the letter also raised a new question. Had Alexander ever received it? Had he known about his child before he died? Arthur shook his head.
"I don't know," he said.
The letter was amongst his belongings, but it was unopened. I assumed it was just another letter from a friend, a well-wisher. I never imagined Felicia realized that Alexander had likely never seen the letter. He had probably been killed before it could reach him. He had died without knowing that he was going to be a father. He had died without knowing that his legacy would live on. The tragedy of their story deepened, the injustice of it all almost unbearable. But Felicia also felt a renewed sense of determination. She had to find Eleanor, Alexander, and Amelia's daughter. She had to tell her the truth, to share with her the story of her parents' love, to give her the locket, the letters, the legacy that was rightfully hers. Arthur offered to help Felicia with her search. He had contacts in London, connections to various organizations, including adoption agencies and charities. He promised to make inquiries, to see if he could track down any information about Eleanor's adoptive family. Felicia spent the next few days exploring London, visiting libraries, archives, and hospitals, searching for any further clues. The city was a maze of streets and buildings, a vast, sprawling metropolis that held countless secrets. She felt a growing sense of frustration. She had come so far, yet she was still so far from her goal. She was starting to doubt whether she would ever find Eleanor, whether she would ever be able to bring this story to a close. One evening, as she was walking back to her hotel, she passed a small, unassuming church. The doors were open, and she could hear the sound of music, a choir singing a hymn. She felt drawn to the church, a sense of peace and tranquility emanating from within. She entered the church and sat down in a pew, listening to the music. The voices of the choir were beautiful, soaring through the vaulted ceilings, filling the space with a sense of hope and serenity. As she sat there, listening to the music, Felicia felt a sudden wave of emotion. She thought of Alexander and Amelia, of their love, their loss, their legacy. She thought of Eleanor, their daughter, growing up without knowing her true parents, without knowing her true story. She closed her eyes, and a silent prayer escaped her lips. She prayed for guidance, for strength, for the courage to continue her search. She prayed that, somehow, she would find Eleanor, that she would be able to bring her home. As she opened her eyes, she noticed a woman sitting a few rows ahead of her. The woman was elderly, her hair silver, her posture erect. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at Felicia's memory. The woman turned her head slightly, and Felicia caught a glimpse of her profile. Her heart skipped a beat. The woman's features, they were strikingly similar to Alexander's. The same eyes, the same nose, the same chin. Could it be? Could this woman be Eleanor? The whispers across the Atlantic had been faint, but they had led her here, to this church, to this moment. Felicia felt a surge of hope, a belief that, against all odds, she was about to find what she was looking for. The connection felt almost impossible, yet undeniably present. Chapter 10. The Unsent Telegram. Felicia's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the woman in the pew ahead, her mind racing. The resemblance to Alexander was undeniable, but could it truly be Eleanor? After all this time, after all the false leads and dead ends, could she have stumbled upon her so unexpectedly in a quiet London church? She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to intrude, to raise false hopes, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. She had to know. As the hymn ended and the congregation began to file out, Felicia approached the woman. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't help but notice you resemble someone I've been researching." "A Major Alexander Pierce?" The woman turned, her eyes, a striking shade of blue, the same color as Alexander's, widened in surprise. She studied Felicia's face intently, a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "Alexander Pierce?" she whispered, her voice raspy with age. He was my..." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "He was my father." Felicia's heart leaped. It was her. Eleanor. After all this time, after all the searching, she had found her. "My name is Felicia Daniels," she said, extending her hand. "I'm from New York. I've been researching your parents' story, Alexander and Amelia." Eleanor took Felicia's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Amelia, my mother," she whispered. I never knew them. I was adopted." Felicia explained her connection to the library, her discovery of Alexander's poem, her conversations with Clara and Eleanor Pierce, her journey to London. She shared the details of her research, the letters, the photographs, the birth certificate. Eleanor listened intently, her eyes riveted on Felicia's face. She was overwhelmed with emotion, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had grown up not knowing her true parents, believing she was an orphan, abandoned by her mother. I always felt a connection," Eleanor said, her voice choked with emotion. "A sense of longing. I used to dream of a man, a soldier with kind eyes. I never understood until now." Felicia reached into her bag and retrieved the silver locket, the one Alexander had given to Amelia. She handed it to Eleanor. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the locket. She carefully opened it, her eyes widening as she saw the miniature portrait of Alexander and the lock of his hair. This is him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My father." She closed the locket, clutching it tightly to her chest. It was a tangible link to her past, a symbol of the love that had brought her into the world, a love that had been tragically cut short by war. Felicia also shared the letters, Alexander's letters to his mother, and Amelia's letters to Elijah Thorne. She explained Amelia's pregnancy, her secret, her desperate hope to share the news with Alexander. Eleanor was stunned to learn that her father had never known about her existence. She had always believed that he had abandoned her, that he had chosen not to be a part of her life. He didn't know," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "He died without knowing about me." Felicia explained the circumstances of Alexander's death, the Battle of the Somme, the telegram reporting him missing in action. She shared the final letter he had written to his mother, the one that ended with the words, "Your legacy lives on." Eleanor realized that the legacy her father had spoken of was her. She was his legacy, the living embodiment of his love for Amelia, the child who had survived against all odds. Felicia then revealed the deception of the Harpers, Amelia's family. She explained how they had lied about the child's death, how they had hidden Eleanor away, how they had prevented Eleanor Pierce from knowing about her granddaughter's existence. Eleanor was shocked and angered by the Harpers' cruelty. She had grown up believing that her mother had abandoned her, that she had been unwanted, unloved. Now, she learned the truth. Her mother had loved her, had wanted to keep her, but had been prevented from doing so by her own family. As they talked, Felicia and Eleanor discovered a shared connection to the church. Eleanor had been a member of the congregation for many years, finding solace in the music, the community, the sense of belonging. Felicia explained that she had been drawn to the church by the sound of the choir, a feeling of peace and tranquility that had resonated with her. They realized that their meeting, so unexpected, so improbable, had been more than just chance. It felt like fate, like destiny, like the hand of Providence guiding them together. Felicia invited Eleanor to visit her at her hotel, to spend more time together, to share their stories, to connect with each other. Eleanor readily agreed. As they left the church, walking side by side, Felicia felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had accomplished her mission. She had found Eleanor, Alexander, and Amelia's daughter. She had brought her home, at least figuratively. She had restored her rightful legacy. But there was one more thing Felicia needed to do. She had discovered, amongst Arthur Chesterton's papers, an unsent telegram. It was a telegram that Alexander had written to Amelia just days before the Battle of the Somme. He had likely intended to send it, but had been prevented from doing so by the chaos of the war. The telegram was short, but its message was powerful. "My dearest A," Alexander had written. "Received your letter. Our child. My heart soars. Wait for me. I will return. We will be a family. All my love, Alexander." Felicia knew that she had to share this telegram with Eleanor. It was a message from her father, a message of love, of hope, of a future that had never been. She decided to wait until the following day to give Eleanor time to process everything she had learned. She wanted to present the telegram in a special way, a way that would honor the memory of Alexander and Amelia. The unsent telegram was a poignant reminder of the fragility of life, the cruelty of war, the enduring power of love. It was a message from the past, a message that had finally reached its destination after all these years. It was a message that would complete the circle, that would bring closure to this wartime love story. And the location, she knew, would be immensely important. Chapter 11. Scars of the Somme. Felicia spent a restless night, her mind filled with images of Alexander and Amelia, their love story, their tragic fate. She thought of Eleanor, her life transformed by the revelations of the past few days. She felt a profound sense of responsibility, a desire to make amends for the years of separation, the lies, the deception. She decided to meet Eleanor at the Imperial War Museum. It seemed a fitting location, a place where the history of the Great War was preserved, a place where the sacrifices of millions were remembered. She wanted Eleanor to see the telegram, to hear her father's words, in a context that honored his memory, that acknowledged the devastating impact of the war on their lives. She arrived at the museum early, securing a quiet corner in one of the exhibits dedicated to the Battle of the Somme. The exhibit was filled with artifacts, photographs, and letters from the front, a stark reminder of the horrors of trench warfare. The air was heavy with the weight of history, the echoes of gunfire, and cries of pain seeming to linger in the silence. Eleanor arrived shortly after, her face pale but composed. She had clearly spent a sleepless night as well, grappling with the new reality of her life, the truth about her parents, her identity. Felicia led Eleanor to the quiet corner, where they sat facing each other. She took a deep breath, preparing to share the final piece of the puzzle, the unsent telegram. "Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's one more thing I need to show you. Something I found amongst Arthur Chesterton's papers. It's a telegram. From your father. To your mother." Eleanor's eyes widened in anticipation. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing Felicia's. Felicia carefully unfolded the telegram, the paper brittle and yellowed with age. She read the words aloud, her voice choked with emotion. "My dearest A," she read. "Received your letter. Our child. My heart soars. Wait for me. I will return. We will be a family. All my love, Alexander." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks, silent tears of joy, of grief, of overwhelming emotion. He knew, she whispered, her voice barely audible.
"He knew about me.
He wanted me." Felicia nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "He loved you, Eleanor," she said. "He loved you before you were even born. He dreamed of a future with you, with your mother. A future that was stolen from him." Eleanor clutched the telegram to her chest, her body shaking with sobs. It was a message from beyond the grave, a message of love, of hope, of a future that had never been. It was a message that had finally reached its destination after all these years. They sat there for a long time, in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of the psalm. The telegram was a tangible link to the past, a bridge across the years, a testament to the enduring power of love. Felicia then shared with Eleanor the details of her research, the stories of Alexander and Amelia's love, their secret meetings, their forbidden romance. She described Alexander's courage, his compassion, his leadership. She spoke of Amelia's strength, her independence, her unwavering love for Alexander. Eleanor listened intently, absorbing every word, every detail. She was piecing together the fragments of her parents' lives, creating a mosaic of their love, their loss, their legacy. She learned about the Harpers' cruelty, their deception, their attempts to erase Alexander and Amelia's memory. She felt a surge of anger, a desire for justice, but also a sense of pity for these people who had been so consumed by pride and prejudice. Felicia also shared with Eleanor the story of Elijah Thorne, his friendship with Amelia, his knowledge of her pregnancy, his sacrifice in keeping her secret. Eleanor was deeply moved by Elijah's loyalty, his compassion, his willingness to protect her mother. As they talked, Eleanor began to understand the scars of the psalm, the invisible wounds that had shaped her life, even though she had never experienced the war firsthand. She realized that she was a child of the war, a product of its devastation, its loss, its enduring legacy. She also realized that she was not alone. She had Felicia, who had brought her this far, who had uncovered the truth, who had given her back her parents, her history, her identity. She had Arthur Chesterton, Alexander's cousin, who had welcomed her with open arms, who had offered her a connection to her father's family. And she had Eleanor Pierce, Alexander's mother, who had waited for so long, who had grieved for so long, who had finally been reunited with her granddaughter. Felicia suggested that they visit Eleanor Pierce, to share the telegram with her, to bring the three of them together. Eleanor readily agreed. They left the museum, walking side by side, their steps echoing through the hallowed halls. The scars of the psalm were still visible, etched in the faces of the people they passed, in the buildings that bore the marks of war, in the air that still carried the scent of smoke and death. But amidst the darkness, there was light. The light of love, of hope, of reconciliation. The light of a legacy that had survived, against all odds. The light of a family reunited, after years of separation, after years of silence. Chapter 12. A Dance of Deception. Felicia and Eleanor traveled to New York, the city where Alexander and Amelia's love story had begun, the city where their legacy had been hidden for so long. The journey was filled with emotion, a mixture of anticipation, trepidation, and a growing sense of connection between the two women. Eleanor, having lived her entire life in England, found herself captivated by the bustling energy of New York, a stark contrast to the quiet, war-weary streets of London. They arrived at Eleanor Pierce's brownstone in Greenwich Village, the same house where Alexander had lived, where he had written his letters, where he had dreamed of a future with Amelia. The house felt familiar, imbued with the presence of the past, a silent witness to the love story that had unfolded within its walls. Eleanor Pierce greeted them at the door, her face etched with a mixture of joy and apprehension. She had spoken to Felicia on the phone, but meeting her granddaughter in person, seeing the living embodiment of her son's love, was a moment she had long dreamed of, yet never believed possible. The three women sat in the parlor, the same room where Felicia had first met Eleanor Pierce, the room where Alexander's letters had been kept, hidden away from the world. The air was thick with emotion, the silence punctuated by the ticking of an old grandfather clock, a constant reminder of the passage of time. Felicia presented Eleanor Pierce with the telegram, the unsent message from Alexander to Amelia, the words that confirmed his knowledge of his child, his love for his unborn daughter. Eleanor Pierce took the telegram, her hands trembling. She read the words slowly, her eyes filling with tears. She had lived with the belief that her son had died without knowing about his child, that his legacy had been cut short, incomplete. Now she learned the truth. He knew, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He knew about Eleanor. He wanted her. Eleanor, Alexander's daughter, reached out and took her grandmother's hand. The two women looked at each other, their eyes locking in a moment of profound connection. They were bound together by blood, by history, by the enduring love of Alexander and Amelia. Felicia then shared with Eleanor Pierce the details of her research, the story of the Harpers' deception, their lies, their attempts to erase Alexander and Amelia's memory. Eleanor Pierce listened intently, her anger growing with each revelation. She had suspected the Harpers' cruelty, but she had never known the full extent of their deceit. They were monsters, she said, her voice filled with bitterness. They stole my son, and they tried to steal my granddaughter. They will pay for what they have done. Eleanor Pierce was a woman of action, a woman of determination. She had lived a long life, filled with both joy and sorrow, and she had learned to fight for what she believed in. She decided that she would confront the Harpers, that she would expose their lies, that she would reclaim her family's legacy. Felicia and Eleanor, Alexander's daughter, supported her decision. They were united in their desire for justice, for truth, for the recognition of Alexander and Amelia's love. They discovered that Charles Harper, Amelia's father, was long dead, but his son, Amelia's brother, Richard Harper, was still alive. He was a powerful and influential man, a prominent figure in New York society. He had inherited his father's wealth, his influence, and his ruthless ambition. They knew that confronting Richard Harper would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous. He was a man who was used to getting his way, a man who would stop at nothing to protect his family's reputation. But they were determined to try. They decided to arrange a meeting with Richard Harper, to present him with the evidence of his family's deception, to demand that he acknowledge Eleanor's existence, to restore her rightful inheritance. Felicia used her connections at the library to gather information about Richard Harper, his business dealings, his social circle, his weaknesses. She discovered that he was a man who valued appearances above all else, a man who was obsessed with maintaining his family's image, his social standing. They planned their strategy carefully. They knew that they needed to be prepared for a confrontation, that Richard Harper would likely deny everything, that he would try to discredit them, to silence them. They decided to enlist the help of a lawyer, a prominent attorney who specialized in family law, someone who was not afraid to challenge the powerful and influential. They presented the lawyer with all the evidence they had collected, the letters, the photographs, the birth certificate, the telegram. The lawyer was impressed by the evidence, convinced of the validity of their claim. He agreed to represent them, to help them confront Richard Harper, to fight for Eleanor's rights. The meeting with Richard Harper was arranged at his opulent office in a towering skyscraper overlooking Central Park. The office was a symbol of his power, his wealth, his influence. It was a place designed to intimidate, to overwhelm, to assert his dominance. Felicia, Eleanor Pierce, and Eleanor, Alexander's daughter, arrived at the office together, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were nervous, but they were also determined. They were united in their purpose, their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that they were fighting for justice, for truth, for the memory of Alexander and Amelia. The meeting was a tense, emotional confrontation, a dance of deception and revelation. Richard Harper denied everything, claiming that Felicia's research was based on lies, that the letters were forgeries, that the telegram was a fabrication. He tried to intimidate them, to threaten them, to silence them. But they stood their ground. They presented him with the evidence, piece by piece, exposing his family's lies, revealing the truth about Alexander and Amelia's love, about Eleanor's birth, about the Harpers' attempts to erase their legacy. The lawyer presented Richard Harper with a legal demand, a claim for Eleanor's rightful inheritance, a share of the Harper family fortune. He threatened to take the case to court, to expose the Harpers' deception to the public, to ruin their reputation. The carefully constructed facade of Richard began to crumble. He began to fear the weight of his actions, his own vulnerability. Chapter 13. The Price of Loyalty. Richard Harper, cornered and facing exposure, shifted his tactics. He abandoned his outright denials and adopted a posture of wounded innocence, claiming he had been unaware of his father's actions. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, a loyal son who had merely followed his father's instructions, believing them to be in the best interests of the family. "I was young then," he pleaded, his voice carefully modulated to convey regret. "I trusted my father. I believed he was doing what was right. I never questioned his decisions." Felicia, Eleanor Pierce, and Eleanor exchanged skeptical glances. They didn't believe him for a moment. Richard Harper was a shrewd, calculating man, not a naive, easily manipulated boy. He had clearly known about his sister's pregnancy, about his father's deception, and he had actively participated in the cover-up. The lawyer pressed him further, presenting evidence of Richard's involvement in the family's financial affairs, his knowledge of the adoption arrangements, his correspondence with the orphanage where Eleanor had been placed. Richard Harper continued to deflect, to evade, to obfuscate. He claimed that he had been acting under duress, that his father had threatened him, that he had been forced to comply with his wishes. He was a powerful man, Richard said, his voice trembling slightly. He controlled everything. "I had no choice." Eleanor, Alexander's daughter, finally spoke, her voice filled with a quiet intensity that commanded attention. "You had a choice, Mr. Harper," she said. "You could have chosen to do the right thing. You could have chosen to protect my mother, to protect me. But you chose to protect your family's reputation, your wealth, your social standing." Richard Harper looked at Eleanor, his eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and resentment. He saw in her the ghost of his sister, the woman he had helped to betray, the woman whose memory he had tried to erase. "I am sorry," he stammered, his voice barely audible. I regret what happened. But it was a long time ago. It's in the past." Felicia stepped forward, her voice firm and unwavering. "It may be in the past for you, Mr. Harper," she said. "But for Eleanor, for Mrs. Pierce, it is still very much present. You cannot erase the past. You cannot undo the harm you have caused. But you can make amends. You can acknowledge Eleanor's existence. You can restore her rightful inheritance." The lawyer presented Richard Harper with a settlement agreement, a legally binding document that would formally acknowledge Eleanor as Alexander and Amelia's daughter, grant her a share of the Harper family fortune, and provide her with a public apology. Richard Harper hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route. He was trapped, caught in the web of his own lies, his own deception. He knew that if he refused to sign the agreement, he would face a lengthy and costly legal battle, a public scandal that would destroy his reputation, his social standing, everything he had worked so hard to protect. He looked at Eleanor Pierce, her face etched with grief and determination. He saw in her the unwavering spirit of her son, the man he had helped to destroy. He realized that he could not win. With a trembling hand, he reached for the pen and signed the agreement. The price of loyalty, the loyalty he had so blindly offered to his father, had finally come due. He had sacrificed his integrity, his honor, his humanity, for the sake of his family's name, his family's fortune. And now he had lost it all. As they left Richard Harper's office, Felicia, Eleanor Pierce, and Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had won. They had achieved justice for Alexander and Amelia, for Eleanor. They had exposed the Harpers' lies. They had reclaimed their family's legacy. But the victory felt bittersweet. The scars of the past remained, the wounds inflicted by years of deception, of separation, of loss. They could never fully erase the pain, the suffering, the injustice. But they could move forward together. They could build a new future, a future based on truth, on love, on reconciliation. They could honor the memory of Alexander and Amelia by living their lives with courage, with compassion, with integrity. Eleanor, Alexander's daughter, decided to stay in New York, to connect with her grandmother, to explore her American heritage, to build a new life for herself. She had spent her entire life believing she was an orphan, abandoned by her parents. Now she had a family, a history, an identity. Felicia and Eleanor Pierce welcomed her with open arms. They were a family, bound together by blood, by history, by the enduring love of Alexander and Amelia. The dance of deception was over. The truth had been revealed. The legacy had been restored. And the price of loyalty, the price of betrayal, had been paid in full. The future, though uncertain, held the promise of healing, of connection, of a new beginning. Chapter 14. Beyond the Trenches. The settlement with Richard Harper provided Eleanor with financial security, but more importantly, it gave her a sense of belonging, a connection to her family, a recognition of her rightful place in the world. She decided to use some of the funds to establish a foundation in memory of her parents, a foundation that would support young artists and writers, individuals who, like Alexander and Amelia, embodied creativity, passion, and a commitment to social justice. Felicia, Eleanor Pierce, and Eleanor spent many hours together, sharing stories, memories, and dreams. They visited the places that had been significant to Alexander and Amelia: the library where Felicia had first discovered the poem, Greenwich Village where they had lived and loved, the small garden where they had met in secret. They also visited the cemetery where Amelia was buried. She had been laid to rest in a pauper's grave, her family having refused to acknowledge her death, to provide her with a proper burial. Eleanor, with her grandmother's blessing, arranged for Amelia's remains to be moved to the Pierce family plot, to be buried alongside Alexander's mother, to be reunited, in a symbolic way, with the man she had loved. It was a poignant moment, a ceremony of remembrance and reconciliation. They stood together, 3 generations of women, bound together by the tragic events of the past, united by their love for Alexander and Amelia, their commitment to honoring their memory. Eleanor, having grown up in England, was fascinated by her American heritage, by the history and culture of her parents' homeland. She decided to explore the country, to travel to the places that Alexander had written about in his letters, to connect with the landscape that had shaped his life, his dreams. Felicia, having retired from the library, decided to accompany Eleanor on her journey. She felt a deep connection to Eleanor, a sense of responsibility, a desire to help her navigate this new chapter in her life. She also saw it as an opportunity to continue her own journey of self-discovery, to explore her own connection to the past, to the enduring legacy of the war. They traveled across the country, visiting small towns and bustling cities, historical sites and natural wonders. They met people from all walks of life, hearing their stories, learning about their experiences, discovering the diverse tapestry of American life. They visited the battlefields of the Civil War, the places where Alexander's ancestors had fought and died, the places that had shaped his understanding of duty, of sacrifice, of the enduring struggle for freedom and justice. They visited the homes of famous writers and artists, the places where creativity had flourished, where imagination had taken flight, where the human spirit had found expression in words and images. They explored the vast landscapes of the American West, the mountains and deserts, the forests and plains, the places that had inspired awe and wonder, the places that had challenged and transformed the human spirit. As they traveled, Felicia and Eleanor shared their own stories, their own dreams, their own fears. They talked about love and loss, about hope and despair, about the challenges and rewards of life. They discovered a deep connection, a bond that transcended their age difference, their cultural backgrounds, their individual experiences. They also talked about the war, the great war that had shattered their families, that had shaped their lives in profound and lasting ways. They reflected on the futility of violence, the senselessness of conflict, the enduring need for peace and understanding. They realized that the legacy of the war was not just about death and destruction, about loss and grief. It was also about resilience, about courage, about the enduring human capacity for love and compassion. They learned that the trenches, the physical and emotional scars of the war, were not just confined to the battlefields of Europe. They were present in the hearts and minds of individuals, in the fabric of society, in the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. But they also learned that there was life beyond the trenches, that there was hope beyond the despair, that there was love beyond the loss. They discovered that the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, could find a way to heal, to grow, to flourish. They returned to New York, transformed by their journey, their understanding of themselves, their connection to each other, their appreciation for the world around them deepened and enriched. Eleanor decided to dedicate her life to the foundation she had established, to supporting young artists and writers, to fostering creativity and social justice, to carrying on the legacy of her parents. Felicia, inspired by Eleanor's example, decided to return to the library, not as an employee, but as a volunteer, sharing her knowledge, her experience, her passion for literature and history with a new generation. Eleanor Pierce, having finally found peace, having reunited with her granddaughter, having witnessed the restoration of her son's legacy, passed away quietly in her sleep, surrounded by the love of her family. The journey beyond the trenches had been long and arduous, filled with challenges and rewards, with sorrow and joy, with loss and discovery. But it had led them to a place of healing, of understanding, of connection. It had led them to a place where they could honor the past, embrace the present, and look forward to the future with hope and courage. The echoes of war still lingered, but they were fading, replaced by the sounds of life, of love, of a legacy that would endure. Chapter 15. A stolen moment in time. Life settled into a new rhythm for Felicia and Eleanor. They shared a brownstone in Greenwich Village, not far from where Eleanor Pierce had lived, a space filled with the echoes of the past, yet brimming with the promise of the future. Eleanor immersed herself in the work of the foundation, pouring her energy and passion into supporting emerging artists and writers, creating a vibrant community that honored the memory of her parents. Felicia, revitalized by her journey of discovery, became a fixture at the New York Public Library once more, mentoring young researchers, sharing her vast knowledge, and guiding patrons through the labyrinthine stacks. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Felicia and Eleanor were sorting through a box of Alexander's belongings that Arthur Chesterton had sent from London, they stumbled upon a small, unmarked wooden box. It was tucked away amongst old photographs, letters, and military paraphernalia, seemingly overlooked in previous examinations. Curiosity piqued, they carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of small, intricately carved wooden figures. They were soldiers, nurses, civilians, each figure meticulously detailed, capturing the expressions, the postures, the emotions of individuals caught in the throes of war. There was a soldier writing a letter, a nurse tending to a wounded man, a couple embracing, a child holding a tattered doll. Felicia and Eleanor examined the figures with a sense of awe and wonder. They were exquisite works of art, miniature sculptures that captured the human drama of the war with remarkable sensitivity and skill. They realized that these figures must have been carved by Alexander, a hidden talent, a secret passion that he had pursued in the midst of the chaos and carnage of the trenches. Amongst the figures, they found one that stood out. It was a carving of a man and a woman, embracing, their faces turned towards each other, their eyes locked in a gaze of love and longing. The man was wearing a military uniform, the woman a simple dress. There was a sense of intimacy, of tenderness, of a stolen moment in time, captured in the delicate lines of the carving. Felicia and Eleanor recognized the figures immediately. It was Alexander and Amelia, a miniature representation of their love, their connection, their enduring bond. It was a tangible expression of Alexander's artistry, his passion, his devotion to the woman he loved. Eleanor held the carving in her hands, her fingers tracing the contours of the figures, her eyes filling with tears. It was a precious gift from the past, a reminder of her parents' love, a testament to their enduring legacy. They decided to display the carvings in a special exhibit at the foundation, a tribute to Alexander's artistry, a celebration of the human spirit in the face of adversity. They invited artists, writers, historians, and members of the public to view the exhibit, to share in the story of Alexander and Amelia, to reflect on the enduring impact of the war. The exhibit was a resounding success, attracting widespread attention and acclaim. People were moved by the beauty of the carvings, by the story of Alexander and Amelia, by the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable suffering. One evening, as Felicia and Eleanor were preparing to close the exhibit for the night, an elderly gentleman approached them. He was tall and distinguished, his face lined with age, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. He introduced himself as Thomas Ashton, a retired art historian. "I saw the announcement of the exhibit," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I had to come. These carvings, they are extraordinary. I believe they may be more significant than you realize." Felicia and Eleanor exchanged curious glances. They had always appreciated the artistic merit of the carvings, but they had never considered them to be of historical importance. Thomas Ashton explained that he had spent many years researching the art of the First World War, the creative expressions of soldiers, nurses, and civilians who had lived through the conflict. He had studied the trench art, the paintings, the sculptures, the writings that had emerged from the war, the artifacts that captured the human experience of the conflict. "These carvings," he said, pointing to the miniature figures, "they are unique. I have never seen anything quite like them. The detail, the sensitivity, the emotional power, they are remarkable. I believe they may have been created by a soldier who is also a gifted artist." He examined the carving of Alexander and Amelia closely, his eyes widening with recognition. This is extraordinary," he whispered. "This is a masterpiece. This could be the work of Alexander Pierce." Felicia and Eleanor were stunned. They had always known that the carvings were special, but they had never imagined that they might be considered works of significant artistic merit, that they might be recognized as the creation of a known artist. Thomas Ashton explained that Alexander Pierce, although primarily known as a soldier, had also been a talented artist, a student of the renowned sculptor, Auguste Rodin. He had studied in Paris before the war, exhibiting his work in several galleries, earning critical acclaim for his innovative and expressive style. "His work was lost," Thomas Ashton said. "Lost in the war. He stopped creating when he enlisted. I had always hoped that some of his work might have survived. And now here it is." Felicia and Eleanor realized that Alexander's legacy was even greater than they had imagined. He was not just a soldier, a poet, a lover. He was also a gifted artist, a creator of beauty, a man who had found a way to express his humanity, his passion, his vision, even in the midst of the horrors of war. The stolen moment in time, captured in the carving of Alexander and Amelia, was a testament not only to their love, but also to Alexander's artistic genius, a talent that had been hidden, lost, and now rediscovered. Chapter 16. The Unveiling of Truth. The revelation of Alexander's artistic significance added another layer to the already rich and complex tapestry of his legacy. Felicia and Eleanor, guided by Thomas Ashton, embarked on a new journey of discovery, delving into the world of art history, researching Alexander's early work, his training, his influences, his artistic vision. They contacted museums, galleries, and private collectors, seeking information about Alexander's pre-war sculptures, his exhibitions, his critical reception. They discovered that he had been a rising star in the Parisian art scene, known for his innovative use of form and material, his expressive portrayals of the human figure, his exploration of themes of love, loss, and the human condition. They found reviews of his early exhibitions praising his talent, his originality, his sensitivity. They discovered photographs of his sculptures, elegant and powerful works that captured the essence of human emotion, the beauty and fragility of life. They learned that Alexander had been deeply influenced by Rodin, but that he had also developed his own unique style, a style that blended classical techniques with a modern sensibility, a style that reflected his own personal experiences, his own inner world. They realized that the wooden carvings, created in the trenches of the First World War, were a continuation of Alexander's artistic journey, a testament to his enduring passion for creation, his ability to find beauty and meaning even in the midst of destruction and despair. Thomas Ashton helped Felicia and Eleanor arrange a major exhibition of Alexander's work, bringing together his pre-war sculptures, his wartime carvings, and his letters and poems. The exhibition was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a fitting venue for a celebration of Alexander's artistic legacy. The exhibition was a resounding success, attracting widespread critical acclaim and public interest. Art critics hailed Alexander as a lost genius of the early 20th century, a sculptor whose work deserved to be rediscovered and celebrated. Visitors were moved by the beauty and power of his sculptures, by the story of his life, by the enduring legacy of his love for Amelia. Eleanor, now recognized as Alexander's heir, was overwhelmed by the recognition of her father's artistic talent. She had grown up believing he was a soldier, a hero who had died in the war. Now, she discovered that he was also a gifted artist, a creator of beauty, a man whose work had touched the hearts and minds of people around the world. She felt a profound connection to her father, a sense of pride in his accomplishments, a desire to share his legacy with the world. She became a passionate advocate for his art, working with museums and galleries to ensure that his work would be preserved and appreciated for generations to come. Felicia, who had played such a crucial role in uncovering Alexander's story, felt a deep sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. She had started her journey with a cryptic poem, a whisper from the past, and she had ended up revealing a hidden world of love, loss, art, and legacy. She realized that her own life had been transformed by her journey, that she had found a new purpose, a new passion, a new connection to the past. She had become a historian, a detective, a storyteller, a guardian of memory. The exhibition also brought closure to the long and painful saga of the Harpers. Richard Harper, now an old and frail man, attended the opening of the exhibition, accompanied by his family. He was confronted by the overwhelming evidence of his father's deception, of his own complicity, of the injustice he had inflicted upon Eleanor and her grandmother. He publicly apologized to Eleanor, acknowledging her as Alexander and Amelia's daughter, expressing his regret for the pain he had caused. It was a moment of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of healing. The unveiling of truth, the recognition of Alexander's artistic legacy, had brought closure to the past, had allowed the wounds of war to begin to heal. It had also created a new future, a future filled with hope, with possibility, with the enduring power of love and art. As Felicia and Eleanor stood together in the crowded gallery, surrounded by Alexander's sculptures, by the images of his love for Amelia, by the echoes of his wartime experiences, they felt a sense of peace, of completion, of gratitude. They had uncovered a hidden world, a world of beauty and tragedy, of love and loss, of art and legacy. They had brought Alexander's story to light. They had restored his rightful place in history. They had honored his memory. They had fulfilled his legacy. The unveiling of truth had been a long and arduous journey, but it had been worth it. It had transformed their lives. It had connected them to the past. It had given them a new understanding of themselves, of the world, of the enduring power of the human spirit. The shadows of the war still lingered, but they were receding, replaced by the light of art, of love, of a legacy that would endure for generations to come. Chapter 17. Letters from a Stranger. Life continued its gentle rhythm for Felicia and Eleanor. The foundation flourished, nurturing young talents and becoming a hub for artistic expression and social discourse in Greenwich Village. Felicia, a beloved figure at the library, found immense joy in guiding researchers and sharing her ever-growing knowledge of history, literature, and now, art. The brownstone they shared became a sanctuary, filled with books, art, music, and the comforting presence of shared history and newfound family. One rainy afternoon, a package arrived for Eleanor. It was postmarked from a small town in France, a place Felicia vaguely recognized from Alexander's letters as being near the Somme battlefield. The return address simply listed a name, Genevieve Dubois. Intrigued, Eleanor carefully opened the package. Inside, nestled amongst layers of protective wrapping, was a small, leather-bound diary and a stack of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The diary was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but legible. The letters were addressed to Alexander Pierce, in a handwriting that was unfamiliar, a delicate, flowing script. Eleanor and Felicia exchanged curious glances. Who was Genevieve Du Bois? And what was her connection to Alexander? Eleanor began to read the diary, her voice hushed with anticipation. The diary belonged to Genevieve, a young French woman who had lived in a small village near the Somme during the First World War. Her entries chronicled the daily life of the village, the impact of the war on her family and community, the constant fear of shelling and occupation, the struggles to survive amidst the chaos and destruction. As Eleanor read further, she discovered that Genevieve had encountered Alexander during the Battle of the Somme. He had been stationed near her village, and she had met him while working as a volunteer nurse at a makeshift field hospital. Genevieve wrote of Alexander with admiration and respect, describing his kindness, his compassion, his courage. She noted his artistic talent, mentioning that he would often sketch in his spare time, capturing the landscapes, the people, the scenes of war that surrounded him. She also wrote of their conversations, their shared moments of quiet reflection amidst the horrors of the war. She learned about his life in America, his love for Amelia, his dreams for the future. He shared his poetry with her, his words expressing his longing for home, his hope for peace, his enduring love for the woman he had left behind. The letters, Eleanor discovered, were written by Genevieve to Alexander, but they had never been sent. She had kept them, hidden away for all these years, a secret treasure, a testament to a brief but meaningful connection forged in the crucible of war. In her letters, Genevieve expressed her gratitude for Alexander's friendship, her admiration for his talent, her sorrow for his loss. She wrote of the impact he had had on her life, the inspiration he had given her, the hope he had instilled in her amidst the darkness of war. She also wrote of the aftermath of the battle, the devastation, the loss, the grief. She described the search for survivors, the identification of the dead, the burial of the fallen soldiers. She mentioned that she had helped to bury Alexander, that she had placed a small wooden carving, a figure of a soldier, in his grave, a tribute to his artistry, his humanity, his sacrifice. Felicia and Eleanor were deeply moved by Genevieve's diary and letters. They provided a new perspective on Alexander's life, a glimpse into his experiences during the war, a testament to his enduring impact on those he had encountered. They realized that Alexander's legacy extended beyond his family, beyond his art, beyond his country. He had touched the lives of people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences. He had inspired them, comforted them, given them hope amidst the despair of war. Eleanor decided to write to Genevieve, to thank her for sharing her memories of Alexander, to express her gratitude for the kindness and compassion she had shown him. She wrote of her own journey of discovery, her newfound connection to her father, her appreciation for his life, his love, his legacy. She received a reply from Genevieve, a letter filled with warmth and emotion. Genevieve was overjoyed to hear from Eleanor, to learn that Alexander's daughter had survived, that his legacy lived on. She wrote of her own life, her family, her memories of the war. She invited Eleanor to visit her in France, to see the village where she had lived, to visit Alexander's grave. Eleanor, accompanied by Felicia, decided to accept Genevieve's invitation. They traveled to France, to the small village near the Somme, to the place where Alexander had fought and died, to the place where his memory was still cherished. They met Genevieve, an elderly woman with a kind face and a gentle spirit. She welcomed them with open arms, sharing her stories, her memories, her love for Alexander. She took them to the cemetery, to Alexander's grave. It was a simple grave, marked by a wooden cross and a small stone, engraved with his name and the dates of his birth and death. Genevieve had tended to the grave for all these years, planting flowers, keeping it clean and tidy, honoring the memory of the American soldier who had touched her life so deeply. Eleanor placed a bouquet of flowers on the grave, a mixture of American and French blooms, a symbol of the connection between their two countries, their two cultures, their shared history. She stood there for a long time, in silence, feeling a profound sense of connection to her father, to the place where he had fallen, to the woman who had cared for him in his final moments. The letters from a stranger, The diary entries from a forgotten past had opened up a new chapter in Alexander's story, a chapter that revealed the depth of his humanity, the breadth of his influence, the enduring power of his legacy. It was a chapter that brought closure, that healed wounds, that connected lives across continents and generations. The whispers of war had faded, replaced by the voices of remembrance, of gratitude, of a love that transcended time and space. Chapter 18. The Edge of No Man's Land. The visit to France deepened Eleanor's connection to her father's past and broadened her understanding of the war's enduring impact. Genevieve, a living link to Alexander's final days, shared anecdotes and insights that painted a vivid picture of the man he was amidst the chaos and brutality of the trenches. She spoke of his quiet courage, his unwavering compassion for his men, and his artistic spirit that found solace in sketching the war-torn landscapes and the faces of those around him. Genevieve also revealed a detail that had been omitted from her diary and letters: the existence of a small, abandoned chapel near the front lines, a place where Alexander often sought refuge, a sanctuary where he could find a moment of peace amidst the constant barrage of gunfire. It was a ruin, really, Genevieve explained, her voice soft with remembrance. Most of the roof was gone, the walls were crumbling, but there was a small altar, still intact, and a stained glass window, miraculously unbroken. Alexander would go there to sketch, to write, to pray, to find a moment of solace. Intrigued, Eleanor, accompanied by Felicia and Genevieve, decided to visit the chapel. They traveled to the edge of what had once been no man's land, a desolate stretch of land still scarred by trenches, shell craters, and the remnants of barbed wire. The landscape was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the deafening roar of artillery that had once filled the air. They found the chapel, hidden amongst a cluster of shattered trees, a crumbling stone structure that had somehow survived the devastation of the war. The roof was indeed mostly gone. The walls were pockmarked with bullet holes, but the small altar remained, and, as Genevieve had described, a single stained glass window, depicting a scene of angels ascending to heaven, shimmered with an ethereal light. As Eleanor stepped inside the chapel, she felt a profound sense of connection to her father, a feeling of being in his presence, of sharing a moment with him across the years. She could imagine him sitting there, sketching in his notebook, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of the space, finding a moment of peace amidst the surrounding horror. Felicia noticed something etched into the stone wall near the altar, a faint inscription, barely visible in the dim light. She examined it closely, her heart skipping a beat. It was Alexander's initials, AP, and beneath them, a single word: Amelia. Eleanor joined Felicia, her eyes widening as she saw the inscription. It was a message from her father, a testament to his enduring love for her mother, a whisper from the past that had survived the ravages of time and war. They spent a long time in the chapel, reflecting on Alexander's life, his love, his sacrifice. They felt a sense of peace, of closure, of connection to the past. They realized that this place, this ruined chapel on the edge of no man's land, was a sacred space, a place where love had endured, where hope had survived, where the human spirit had found a way to transcend the horrors of war. As they were leaving the chapel, Genevieve pointed to a small, overgrown patch of ground near the entrance. "There," she said, her voice trembling slightly. That's where I found him. After the shelling."
He was holding this.
She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished object. It was a wooden carving, the figure of a soldier, the same carving that Genevieve had placed in Alexander's grave. Eleanor took the carving, her hands trembling. She recognized it immediately. It was one of the figures from the collection they had found in the unmarked box, a self-portrait of Alexander, a testament to his artistry, his humanity, his enduring spirit. They realized that Alexander had been carrying this carving with him, a reminder of his art, his life, his love for Amelia. It was a symbol of his resilience, his hope, his unwavering belief in the power of the human spirit. The edge of no man's land, a place of death and destruction, had also been a place of life, of love, of art. It was a place where Alexander had found solace, where he had expressed his creativity, where he had held onto his humanity amidst the inhumanity of war. The visit to the chapel, the discovery of the inscription, the retrieval of the carving brought a new level of understanding and closure to Eleanor and Felicia. They had journeyed to the heart of Alexander's wartime experience. They had connected with his spirit. They had witnessed the enduring power of his love and his art. They returned to New York, carrying with them the memories of their journey, the echoes of the past, the whispers of love and loss that had resonated across the years. The edge of no man's land had become a bridge, connecting them to Alexander, to Amelia, to Genevieve, to a generation that had been scarred by war, but had also found a way to heal, to grow, to endure. The legacy of the war was not just about death and destruction. It was also about life, about love, about the enduring power of the human spirit. Chapter 19. The Heart's Reckoning. Back in New York, the rhythm of life resumed, but with a deeper resonance. The experiences in France, the visit to the chapel, the connection with Genevieve, had woven a richer texture into Eleanor and Felicia's understanding of Alexander's life and the enduring impact of the war. The foundation continued to thrive, a beacon of creativity and social engagement, a testament to the legacy Eleanor was building in her parents' name. One evening, as Felicia and Eleanor were sifting through some of Alexander's sketches that Arthur Chesterton had sent drawings of landscapes, soldiers, and poignant scenes of wartime life, they came across a folded piece of paper tucked within one of the sketchbooks. It was a letter, addressed to Alexander, but unlike Genevieve's letters, this one bore a familiar handwriting, Amelia's. The letter was dated shortly before Alexander's deployment to the Somme, a time when Amelia was already pregnant but had not yet revealed her secret to him. The words were filled with love, longing, and a palpable sense of foreboding. "My dearest Alexander," Amelia wrote, "the thought of you leaving fills me with a dread I cannot describe. I know you must go. That duty calls, but my heart aches at the prospect of our separation. I cling to the memories of our stolen moments, the whispers of our love, the dreams we have shared. I pray for your safe return, for the day when we can be together again, without fear, without secrets, without the shadow of war hanging over us. There is something I long to tell you, something that weighs heavily on my heart, but I fear the timing is not right. I fear adding to your burdens, to the worries you already carry. I will wait, my love, until you are safely home, until we can share this news together, in the light of a new dawn. Know this, my dearest Alexander, that my love for you is unwavering, eternal. It is a flame that burns brightly, even in the darkest of nights. It is a force that will sustain me, guide me, until we are reunited. Come back to me, my love. Come back to me." Felicia and Eleanor read the letter in stunned silence. It was a heartbreaking testament to Amelia's love for Alexander, her fear for his safety, and her unspoken secret, the child she carried within her. It was a letter filled with hope and despair, with longing and resignation, with the tragic irony of a future that would never be. Eleanor held the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. It was a message from her mother, a message of love, of longing, of a future that had been stolen from them. It was a confirmation of Amelia's unwavering devotion to Alexander, her desperate hope for his return, her silent burden of their unborn child. Felicia put her arm around Eleanor, offering comfort and support. They had shared so much, uncovered so many secrets, witnessed so much pain and loss. But this letter, this final message from Amelia, brought a new level of emotional intensity, a deeper understanding of the tragedy that had befallen their families. They realized that this letter, along with Genevieve's letters and diary and Alexander's unsent telegram, completed the circle of communication, the exchange of love and longing that had been interrupted by the war. It was a testament to the enduring power of human connection, the resilience of the human spirit, the unwavering hope for a future that, for Alexander and Amelia, had never arrived. They decided to share the letter with Arthur Chesterton, who had become a close friend and confidant, a valuable source of information and support. Arthur was deeply moved by the letter, by the story of Alexander and Amelia, by the legacy of their love. He suggested that they publish a collection of Alexander's letters, poems, and sketches, along with Amelia's and Genevieve's letters and excerpts from Genevieve's diary. He believed that their story deserved to be shared with the world, that it was a powerful testament to the human cost of war, the enduring power of love, and the resilience of the human spirit. Felicia and Eleanor agreed. They worked with Arthur and a publisher to create a book that would tell Alexander and Amelia's story, a book that would honor their memory, that would share their legacy with a wider audience. The book, titled Letters from No Man's Land, was published to critical acclaim and widespread public interest. It became a bestseller, translated into multiple languages, and adapted into a successful stage play and film. The Heart's Reckoning, the final accounting of love and loss, of hope and despair, had been made. The story of Alexander and Amelia, a story that had begun with a cryptic poem, a whisper from the past, had been told. The legacy of their love, their art, their sacrifice, had been preserved, shared, celebrated. Felicia and Eleanor, bound together by their shared journey of discovery, continued to work together, to support each other, to honor the memory of Alexander and Amelia. They had found a family, a connection, a purpose, amidst the ruins of war. They had transformed loss into legacy, despair into hope, silence into a story that would resonate across generations. The echoes of the past still lingered, but they were now accompanied by the sounds of healing, of growth, of a future filled with possibility. Chapter 20. A Legacy Unveiled. Years passed, and the foundation Eleanor had established in her parents' memory continued to flourish, becoming a vibrant center for the arts and a powerful voice for social justice. Felicia, though officially retired, remained an active presence at the library, a wise and beloved mentor to younger generations of researchers and scholars. The brownstone they shared in Greenwich Village became a haven, filled with books, art, music, and the comforting presence of shared history and enduring friendship. One sunny afternoon, Eleanor received a phone call from a lawyer in London. The lawyer informed her that a distant relative of Amelia Harper, a cousin she had never known, had passed away, leaving a substantial portion of her estate to Eleanor. The cousin, apparently, had been deeply moved by Eleanor's story, by the injustice inflicted upon her family, and had sought to make amends in her will. The inheritance included a small cottage in Cornwall, England, a place that Amelia had visited as a child, a place that held cherished memories for her. Eleanor, accompanied by Felicia, decided to travel to Cornwall to see the cottage, to connect with another piece of her mother's past. The cottage was a charming, whitewashed building, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was surrounded by a wild garden, filled with flowers and herbs, a place of peace and tranquility. The air was fresh and clean, scented with the salt of the sea and the fragrance of the flowers. As Eleanor explored the cottage, she found a small, hidden room, a secret attic space that had been used as a studio. The room was filled with Amelia's childhood drawings, paintings, and writings, a treasure trove of her early creative expressions. Amongst the artwork, Eleanor discovered a self-portrait of Amelia, painted when she was a young woman. The portrait captured her beauty, her intelligence, her spirit, her unwavering gaze. It was a powerful image, a reminder of the woman she had been, the woman she might have become, had her life not been tragically cut short. Felicia, examining the paintings, noticed a recurring motif, a small, silver locket, the same locket that Alexander had given to Amelia, the locket that Eleanor now wore. Amelia had included the locket in several of her paintings, a symbol of her love for Alexander, a testament to their enduring bond. They also found a collection of letters, written by Amelia to her cousin, the woman who had left the cottage to Eleanor. The letters chronicled Amelia's life, her dreams, her fears, her love for Alexander. They revealed her growing sense of isolation, her struggle against her family's disapproval, her determination to follow her heart. In one of the letters, Amelia wrote of a secret dream, a dream she had shared with Alexander, to create a sanctuary for artists, a place where creativity could flourish, where young talents could be nurtured, where the human spirit could find expression and solace. Eleanor realized that the foundation she had established in her parents' memory was the fulfillment of their dream, a dream that had been born in the midst of war, a dream that had survived the ravages of time and loss. She decided to use the cottage in Cornwall as a retreat for artists, a place where they could come to find inspiration, to create, to connect with nature, to escape the pressures of the world. She named it Amelia's Haven, a tribute to her mother's memory, a testament to her enduring spirit. As Felicia and Eleanor stood on the cliff overlooking the sea, watching the sun set over the horizon, they felt a profound sense of peace, of completion, of gratitude. They had journeyed so far, uncovered so many secrets, witnessed so much pain and loss. But they had also found love, friendship, connection, purpose. They had unveiled a legacy of love, of art, of resilience, of hope. They had honored the memory of Alexander and Amelia. They had restored their rightful place in history. They had fulfilled their dreams. The legacy was not just about the past, it was also about the future. It was about the young artists who would find inspiration at Amelia's Haven, the readers who would be moved by Alexander and Amelia's story, the generations who would learn from their experiences. It was a legacy that would endure, a legacy that would continue to inspire, to challenge, to transform. It was a legacy that had been forged in the crucible of war, but had blossomed into a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led them to a place of understanding, of healing, of connection. It had led them to a place where they could embrace the past, celebrate the present, and look forward to the future with hope and courage. The whispers of war had faded, replaced by the sounds of life, of love, of a legacy unveiled, a legacy that would continue to resonate across time and space. They were surrounded, finally, by peace. It was the peace they had earned and, more importantly, a tangible peace, a new world they had, in their own way, brought to life. Epilogue. The years that followed were kind to Felicia and Eleanor. The foundation thrived, becoming a renowned center for the arts, nurturing countless young talents and fostering a vibrant community of creativity and social engagement. Amelia's Haven, the cottage in Cornwall, became a beloved retreat for artists from around the world, a place of inspiration, solace, and connection. Felicia, though her steps grew slower and her eyesight dimmer, remained a vital presence in their lives, a wise and beloved mentor, a source of unwavering support and encouragement. She spent her days surrounded by books, by art, by the echoes of the past, and the vibrant energy of the present. She often sat in the garden of the Greenwich Village brownstone, reading, writing, and reflecting on the journey that had brought her and Eleanor together, the journey that had unveiled a legacy of love, loss, and enduring hope. Eleanor, fulfilling the promise of her parents' legacy, became a prominent figure in the art world, a champion of emerging artists, a passionate advocate for social justice. She traveled the world, speaking at conferences, visiting museums and galleries, sharing the story of Alexander and Amelia, inspiring others with their courage, their resilience, their unwavering belief in the power of love and art. She never forgot the lessons she had learned, the secrets she had uncovered, the sacrifices that had been made. She carried the memory of her parents with her always, a guiding light, a source of strength and inspiration. She wore the silver locket, the one Alexander had given to Amelia, a tangible reminder of their love, their bond, their enduring legacy. One warm summer evening, as Felicia and Eleanor sat together in the garden of the brownstone, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Felicia turned to Eleanor, a gentle smile on her face. "It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?" she said, her voice soft with remembrance. Eleanor nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It has," she said. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Felicia. You brought me my family, my history, my purpose." Felicia reached out and took Eleanor's hand. "We brought each other something precious. Eleanor," she said. "We found each other amidst the ruins of war, amidst the echoes of the past. We found a connection, a friendship, a family." They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the city, the gentle rustling of the leaves, the distant murmur of voices. The air was filled with the scent of roses, a fragrance that always reminded Felicia of Eleanor Pierce, of the parlor in Greenwich Village, of the beginning of their journey. Felicia closed her eyes, a peaceful smile on her face. She felt a sense of completion, of gratitude, of profound contentment. She had lived a long and full life, a life filled with love, with loss, with learning, with discovery. She had witnessed the horrors of war, the enduring power of the human spirit, the transformative beauty of art. She had unveiled a legacy of love, of courage, of resilience, of hope. She had honored the memory of Alexander and Amelia. She had restored their rightful place in history. She had fulfilled their dreams. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Felicia's breath grew shallow, her grip on Eleanor's hand loosening. She took one last, peaceful breath, and then she was gone. Eleanor sat there, holding Felicia's hand, tears streaming down her face. She had lost a dear friend, a mentor, a companion, a member of her family. But she knew that Felicia's spirit would live on, in the books she had loved, in the art she had cherished, in the memories they had shared, in the legacy they had unveiled together. Felicia's journey had ended, but the story continued. The legacy of Alexander and Amelia, the legacy of love, of art, of resilience, of hope, would endure, passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a beacon of light in a world that often seemed dark and uncertain. The cryptic poem had led to a journey of a lifetime, and the lives touched, changed, and healed numbered far beyond the two who had shared that first moment in a quiet New York library. The world was undeniably better for it. The end.